if I think back to like middle school or high school, just the first things that come to my mind where we had Friday morning clubs in middle school where we played. You could choose. One year I just procrastinated and I got stuck in pottery with Mr. Leggett, and that actually rocked. Like it ended up being pretty awesome. But like roller hockey, or like teachers were able to like take things they're passionate about and just goof around with kids for a little bit in the mornings on Fridays. And taking those things away from kids is not okay. It's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we take away phones and then we replace it with a strictly academic setting where kids are just going from class to class to class to class, of course they're going to rebel. But give them a reason and foster a reason for them to want to be at school without their phone. Childhood isn't broken, but it is being reprogrammed. This is The Slow Scroll, a conversation about kids, tech, and the slow work of growing up in a world built for instant everything. We're not here to romanticize the past or panic about the future. We're here to think harder about what kids need, what adults missed, and how schools can be a place to get it right. Each episode is a chance to untangle the messy intersection of tech, identity, learning, and growth with curiosity, honesty, and a deep respect for what childhood can still be. All right, we are back for part 4, which is going to cover chapters 9, 10, 11, 12. I didn't look at it's to the end of the book. I think we'll probably talk about the conclusion and skip the acknowledgments. So wherever that leads us, we're just talking about the rest today. So starting off with chapter 9, which is preparing for collective action. And we're actually going to speed through these first 2 chapters. One, because chapter 9 is pretty short, and we've got some things to say about that for sure. But then chapter 10 is all about governments and tech companies. And we were thinking, because that's outside of our purview, and he even name checks this in here, or says this specifically in here, where like this might not be interesting to people, or this might not be super actionable, because we're talking about like national government changes, big changes by tech companies, sweeping legislation, that type of stuff. And so he like makes some suggestions, but as 3 educators and parents right now, we decided that's not something super actionable for us. So we actually have quite a bit more to say starting in chapter 11 and chapter 12, which is what can schools do now and what can parents do now. So let's start off by talking about chapter 9, preparing for collective action, and just some of our thoughts on that before we quickly go through chapter 10.
I feel like we kind of touched on this in our previous episode. We were giving some examples that I felt were really touching on this idea of the collective action problems. And he really just, the parts that jumped out to me was when he's talking about how parents are facing this all the time, how every day, especially when we come into it. And he gives those examples. I mean, and this was in the news recently, but he gives these examples of, you know, what one person deems acceptable, somebody else might deem neglectful. And so having these disconnects has really kind of created a ripe environment for some of these other issues that, you know, then come up and are more difficult to handle.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys in your community, but I think it was interesting where, I mean, we'll talk about this more when we get to the parents piece, but some of his suggestions are like linking up with other parents and like coming up with some of these collective action agreements as parents, because it's much easier as a parent. Your kid isn't coming home and saying, so-and-so is doing this, like they have a cell phone. Like I think I mentioned earlier, our son, our kindergartner, came home this year and asked for a cell phone because his buddy in elementary school, kindergarten, has one. And it's just right now, since he's 6, it's so easy to be like, no, you're not getting a phone. But it's much, much harder, I'm assuming, when they get to be like 11/12 and their friends are on social media and they've got much stronger opinions. So I thought that was interesting, but I'm not sure how that works in actuality.
My 12-year-old recently made the comment that I wasn't going to let him get a cell phone until he was 50. And I said, yes, you finally understand. So
you're like, if you're still here when you're 50, we've got bigger problems, buddy.
Right. No, I think that this, though, like what you're talking about is where schools can support a lot of this work, because you spoke earlier about, especially with young families starting school, they might not have those connections with their kids' peers yet. So I do feel that if a school district could offer guidelines and recommendations and say, here's what we recommend our families get behind in approaching this with their kids. And it gives that anchor point for everybody else to kind of then lock in. I think that is a place where schools can help out a little bit.
Ooh, oh, that's awesome.
A lot bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so my initial thought was like 10 families. And I'm like, gosh, I mean, we've got friends, but I don't know that we have like 10 families that would commit to that. But it started getting me thinking about many school districts do like tech nights. So Debbie, what you were saying about, schools being able to support. I know my son's school has worked on like device free, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. I think it is such a challenge because there's so many exceptions. So what it got me thinking about is one of my colleagues, her son is a type 1 diabetic. And so he's using monitoring on his phone and feeling a lot of independence with that. So maybe it's more about dialogue with your kids about how and when, and maybe it's, I don't know, maybe there are other alternatives, or just, me specifically thinking about not providing a smartphone. Maybe my son just gets a regular phone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the bane of my existence as a teacher was the what if game with my middle schoolers. Well, what if this and what if that and what if this? And it took me about a year or so of teaching to realize that if I had a good relationship with my kids, I could say, I'm not playing that game. You know what the answer is. You know what I expect of you. And you are sitting here trying to find loopholes. How happy do you think that makes me? Does that show respect for me as your teacher? Is that respecting your time in my classroom? Don't you think I have more respect for you as your teacher and you as my student in this sense? And that was almost like universally effective, where if I just shut that down pretty quickly and a kid says, what if? So that way, like if I have a student who says, well, what if I need to be on my phone, I don't have anybody in my life who has type 1 diabetes, but if there's an app to manage blood sugar and stuff like that. What if I need to be on my phone? Well, of course, like I had students in my class who, I had a bathroom policy for sure, but like I had a student in one of my classes that had some medical exceptions that kid needed access to the bathroom at a moment's notice whenever he needed it. And like, yeah, he goes. And you know what? Kids get that. Kids understand that. At one time I got, well, why does Stefan get to go and the rest of us? I go, everybody gets what they need, man. Don't you trust that I have everyone's best interest at heart? And that took care of it. But it only worked because I had a good relationship with my students. So I think there's a decent amount of that as well, which for me as a parent is so encouraging. The fact that there are no like broad solutions out there, like tech wise, and there's some things we can do to support our kids as they get phones and technology. But what it ultimately comes down to is a good relationship, is like those things that like we have the most fun building anyways, is if you have just a good relationship. I'm thinking like with your students, but also like as a parent, as you're listening to your kid and you're trying to involve them in conversations. I think a lot of that will go a long way. So again, not going to be a cure-all because it's much harder to be a parent, I think, than it is to be a teacher or someone who's done both. So yeah, I just that was an interesting, like that was kind of my thinking as I got into that teachers and parents section.
I love that.
Okay, so
sorry, go ahead, Debbie.
Well, I was just going to say, I know we said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on chapter 10, but there are two things I want to just call out before we
do it
100% jump into the parents and schools section. Sorry. And I think I'm the one that segued us there. So, there we go. But I just want to point out on page 232, he talks about this, and this was the first time I heard of this. I was kind of surprised. But he talks about this age appropriate design code that was adopted in the UK in 2020. And I looked it up, and it's 15 standards that these are how, when these developers are designing these products, they are thinking through what is best for the child. And it's not so much in putting the responsibility, it's kind of in the design of it. And a lot of it, some of the examples were sort of those default settings around location and privacy settings and things like that. There were some simple ones, but there are, I mean, you should just Google it. But I found on the UK, there's like these 15 standards that are sort of best practices for designing these programs. And I just think the fact that there is already a blueprint, there are already countries enacting this. This is not a hard switch for the United States to make, other than the fact than what they say on page 228 at the very top, that the users are the product. Like, so this is going to come back to my consumerism, right? Again, this is, I think the big difference is that people are profiting off of hooking our young children. And so to me, that's important enough to say, like, if you do want to, you know, and I think I am going to do a little bit more research in this and see where is the, like, where are we at with these design codes? Because it kind of sounded like it's being danced around in our legislation. And so that's something that's important enough to me in my role that I think I will look into some more.
Yeah,
this idea that we don't have to recreate like, these frameworks are out there. So I don't know why we're not taking this more seriously.
Yeah, I went and grabbed it. I'll put it in the show notes of the podcast so people could like click on it and go explore it. And then as we're doing for people who are going through the Canvas course with us, maybe we can link that there as well so you can explore it. I did not go. I'm glad you went and looked this up. I'm glad this is cool stuff. And
yeah,
that you saying like switching in the United States, it would be such an easy shift. I think like a simple shift for sure, but you're right. There's a monetary incentive to not do these types of things. And as a responsible adult, internet using adult, it makes me think of, you ever heard the phrase, to the privileged, equality feels like oppression? That, like, as you start to take away what could be like viewed as freedoms, right? Like, I am free, as far as I know, to surf the internet in whatever way I think is best. And anytime someone starts to put a restriction on that, I get a little prickly, right? Because I'm coming from a pretty privileged place of someone who had two parents who are still together, who raised me, both college educated. Everyone in my family went to college, right? Like, it's, and just a good, like what's the word I'm looking for? A relatively stable house right now. I say relatively because we have the 2-year-old. So like, it's never actually that stable. But, and as someone who's like got those opportunities and done some thinking about this, like I'm more informed about some of this stuff than maybe some typical users. And so like, it makes me think of one of the suggestions that he made, maybe in the parent section or the teacher section, was like age verification for certain websites. I absolutely understand why you would do that, especially for like age restricting things that need to be age restricted. You know, like, you're not supposed to be exposed to certain things developmentally at a certain point. And that makes perfect sense to me. But my brain starts to go to like a slippery slope argument. You know, when you start like introducing like an age restriction on something, where do you start to draw that line? You know, like if you're talking about something like pornography, absolutely, right? You need to age restrict that for kids, especially as they're developing. That can do like he had a whole chapter about it, right? But if you're like, there's not to go down this road, maybe we cut this out because this might be a little bit too charged. But as you start like verifying with IDs, things like voting or civil services, right? Any sort of like government or civic services, things that some people think that you have this basic human right to access. If you don't have your government ID for whatever reason to be able to exist as a human being, like the internet is this kind of egalitarian place where you can get access to sometimes too many things. And as you start to like restrict that to people, I think there's some potential harm that can be done there. And so that's why, like, I'm a big fan of legislation and debate and talk around these types of things, because I certainly don't have the answers. But there are some things about like these proposed solutions that really excite me, but also in the exact same breath worry me a little bit, because in the wrong hands, I think they can be used to do some harm, and we've seen that.
Yeah, I agree. But I would say when it comes to kids, they have to show ID to go in and buy cigarettes or alcohol or a lottery ticket. And so this is no different. To me, we know that these are addictive, dangerous things that need to be addressed in a certain way. And I will just say that these are designed, this is under like the children's section. This isn't about all products everywhere. This is around how are we designing and targeting children? And it was funny because there was a section where I think it was in the first chapter where he's talking about the way they go after kids. And I underlined, I said, oh my gosh, this is just like the tobacco companies. And then on the very next sentence, he's like, similar to the tobacco companies. So I think that's a really good example, and I know they've done some kind of campaigning around sort of the similarities between like the vaping ads versus the old cigarette ads. But I think if we're willing to take these measures in these other areas that we know are harmful for children, that say talking about getting a driver's license, right? There's all these on ramps to getting it. So we have these systems in place where kids have to verify ages. So I think while I think that's a good caution to be thinking of, I think that's a pretty big jump between let's be safe and mindful and have the best interests of our children when we're designing these things to, well, we can't have that because then everybody's going to have to show ID on the internet. You know what I mean? I think that's
for sure. But it does, like, there is, I mean, semi an example of that. Like the thing that I quote the most from this book is on 234, where he's talking about that age limit for data collection being 13. Because I had that, I've always wondered, like, why 13? And it was such a part of my life as a 7th grade teacher because my kids were on the cusp of 12 to 13, right? Mm-hmm. And and so as they're going accepting, are you 13? Do you have to get parental consent? What does that even mean? These things are like what are you consenting to here? It's that data collection piece. And so the fact that it was 16 and then it only got dropped to 13 as a negotiating, this is kind of the best we can do, is nothing to do with mental maturity or the development of the brain. It's just that was made by legislators who weren't necessarily thinking about the right things. It was a number. They just settled
arbitrary.
On a number. Yeah. And so
it was a compromise. It was that we should be grateful. It was the best he could do. Oh yeah, that gave me feelings. So, and
to say it's the de facto age of internet adulthood, right? And just on the next page, he kind of likens it to PG-13, right? I mean, those are like, you're seeing a little bit more mature themes. I'm not going to let my son go watch a PG-13 movie. Even the other day, I was like, I just really want them to be into Star Wars. It was May 4th. I was watching one of the Star Wars movies, Empire Strikes Back, the best one. And in the beginning, Luke cuts off the arm of the little snow monster on Hoth. And my son's sitting next to me, and Anna goes, what are you doing? And I hadn't, it's a PG movie, but that was before PG-13, right? And it's like, but it's Star Wars. And so it just didn't really occur to me. Think about
we had the same, it sounds like it was nice in your house. We had the same argument in my house. It sounded like you guys were way more calm.
Think about that same mindset of, oh, well, they have to be 13 to accept, so it's probably fine. In a world with infinite more possibilities, it just never occurred to me that 13 was just arbitrary number. I've always kind of wondered in the back of my head. And then for him to give the history here, I was like, oh, like that'd be one of the first things I think that needs to be addressed is what is actually appropriate for kids. And I love your suggestion of like the beginning of the school year, schools making suggestions, not saying this is what's required. You can control what you do in schools, but providing some kind of like digital wellness material to families saying, hey, as an incoming 6th grader, you're going to start to be getting you, if you haven't already, you're going to be getting questions about cell phones. It'd be so easy for schools to put together a one pager of resources of, this is what you need to look out for. These are some of the online trends. These are like, give that out at back to school night, or at conferences. And that's very, very simple to put together.
It's what parents want to, I would say.
Okay, sorry. You've done all that work around it. Yeah.
I know.
They're eating it up.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about this section before we move on, because I know we want to talk more about the other stuff, but on page 242 and on 243, when he's talking about like, let's build in more incentives, was this idea of designing these public spaces with children in mind. I thought that was really powerful. And this more vocational ed and apprenticeships. You know what I mean? I think these are two things that in our communities, these are ways we can give nods to children and include them. So they, like we were saying the other day, you can't just take something away and not replace it. And I feel like these are some ways that we can support like our young people in that transition to adulthood. So they have engaged reasons to be doing other things. So.
Okay. Real quick. So the school district is not in my region, and I know that I've mentioned it outside of this environment. I can't remember if in one of our earlier versions we talked about it, but there is a larger school district that has done a really fantastic job with this. And I heard them first at NCCE sharing. So they've got like an entire week that's really focused on relationship building with the students. And then not that teachers have to use it, but they do provide some curriculum for kind of that relationship community building aspect. But the piece that really stuck out to me is that they had hosted like a parent night where they provided childcare and food, but then really let the parents identify the topics that they wanted to discuss. And cell phone, naturally, I'm getting goosebumps. Cell phones and like tech use and how to moderate all of that did come up on its own. And then like because that night was so popular, they got a request to do it every month from families. And I know that that's kind of a burden. So one of my questions was like, how did you guys fund this? Because this is fantastic. And I don't remember what, I think they said they got a grant or something like that. But what an authentic way to like keep the conversation going if you do send out information at the beginning of the school year. And I also thought we don't have to go super deep, but there were in Washington State, there was like a school district that did sue public media, social media over mental health. And I don't know what ever come out about that. But in relation to what you were saying, Debbie, the age appropriate design code. So I'm super curious to see like the timing and, does Washington State already have that? It looks, when I did a quick search, it looked like California did. So I'm curious to see like when that lawsuit came out, did that prompt anything in legislation? Did it pass? Because I feel like there's probably some things that I need to learn.
Yeah. I think it can't be a state by state
agreed
thing for it to have any effect. It has to be a united front. And I honestly, why isn't it? Like, what is what other than money in our pockets, what is our opposition to making sure we're doing right by our kids and their mental health? So
Stefan or Debbie, I guess, in health class, somewhere in middle school, I don't remember the exact year, there was like a pact that our class was asked to make around like not smoking. Do you guys recall
dare to keep
receiving
kids off drugs.
It was
it
not
Dare?
dare. It was not dare, but it was
Oh, that's
it was
what I had.
something else. So I want to say like the section focused on multiple things, but like we talked about eating disorders, we talked about smoking. I don't know what the other components were. But there was some sort of like class pact that we were asked to make. Students weren't forced. And just curious, like, did you have that same experience? And what are your thoughts about that? And would that translate or could that translate to cell phone use?
I think that's interesting, and it's actually a perfect segue into the what schools can do now, because like that's that type of drug awareness. Yeah, I remember dare lessons when I was in elementary school. I remember sitting in the assembly at my middle school, watching some anti-bullying video about whatever. I think here's my problem with those types of things. The majority of kids who will sign those pacts, who will say, I pledge not to do drugs. I pledge not to. Those are the like I won't bully. I'll sign on. Those are the ones who aren't going to do it anyways. Like I don't think that sitting in an assembly, this is again my middle school experience. I don't think sitting in an assembly watching a video about why drugs are bad, what cigarettes do to your lungs, or what or why like you shouldn't bully your peers influenced my behavior in any way, shape, or form, because I wasn't going to do those things anyways, because I know Monica and Bruce Troutman would have my skin if I did that. Two supportive parents at home that I had a good relationship with, have a good relationship with. My friends who were plenty of my friends experimented with a lot of those things. The ones who are consistently engaging in that behavior, the ones that are going to do it anyways, because I don't think those things make a difference on a large scale. Maybe for a few small use cases, it has to be a consistent dialogue and resource sharing and community action between parents and schools. I think that is the only sustainable way is family education, is a good relationship in schools, a strong, supportive community in your school. But then there has to be an open line of dialogue with parents so you can truly do that. It takes a village approach.
Yeah, I was going to agree that I get a little uncomfortable when we play on kids' emotions and do this rah, let's all do this thing together. I feel like the majority of the time kids don't like truly understand why, and I'm not saying this can't be done well. And I do think middle school is a prime age to be having these conversations, but I'm with Stefan where it can't be done in a school assembly with everybody in there. Like it needs to be done authentically in relevant ways with real relationship, dealing with real things. And I have a hard time with where schools fall into this because I think I've shared with you my entry, like my student teaching was at a native boarding school in Southeast Alaska. And so these kids lived on campus. They came from villages all over and they lived on campus and came to school. And so they literally had family groups where they were mixed, 9th through 12th graders that it was essentially a advisory on steroids, and so they met regularly both within and outside of school hours to do some of these discussions and things like that. It was very authentic, very relevant to their lives. Then my first teaching job was in a school where they were called academies within the high school, but they were like a small school. So within our big high school, we had 3 academies and I was in the Experience Academy. So we had the same team of teachers and we looped the same group of kids, 9 through 12. And so same thing, our advisories were a little bit more intentional and family-like. I did have mixed grade advisories and when I was doing it that way. When that went away, I became an AVID teacher. Same thing. It's very much based on relationships. And so I do think there's a way to prioritize these, I don't know, communities, systems, whatever you want to call it in our schools. It just takes very clear leadership and buy-in from your staff. And I have been in places where that's there and it's amazing. And then I've been in places where it's not there and it's really sad for me. And so I do think you're going to get, just to answer your question, I am more in favor of that than something where it's like a whole school assembly where we can say, check, we did the drug awareness assembly. Oh, look, we had 100% of our schools signed the pact. I mean, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's the direction necessarily. We did it as a class, so it was a little more intimate than an assembly.
I guess like it meant something to me.
Well, no, I guess I'm just thinking like it would, though we know this is not always the case, right? And in an ideal setting, I guess I'm just thinking about the multiple layers. And perhaps that wouldn't be like the be all end all, but that could be like in addition to. So there's, some information that goes out to parents. Then there's some sort of like regular dialogue open between school and families. Maybe, teachers are also having conversations through their relationships, but really helping the students understand the why behind the choice, as opposed to just focusing on the like, no. And, no conversation around that was my thought. But and maybe it's not a pact, but when he was talking about the 10 families and like being committed to that. So maybe that's truly just having that conversation, and for the parents to be on the same page and helping ensure that happens. But anyway, it was.
Well, I think what's important to remember is like I'm flipping through the What Schools Can Do Now chapter, and while he gives some suggestions, I don't think his intention here is ever to say like these things are going to solve the problem. I think like any good classroom, a teacher has a deep understanding of the standards that they're teaching at any given point, and they know where they want students to be and understand that getting there is going to look different for every single student. Might be similar for some, but that's personalized learning, right? Like every kid is going to learn differently at a different pace, but they know where they need to be. They kind of have this endpoint there. And so these suggestions that he makes, I love, and I think would be good first steps, but can all be implemented poorly or really, really well. So like I'm looking at some of his big headers here, phone-free schools. I am now a big proponent of that. And I think
but can I say, sorry.
No, go.
I am also a proponent of that, especially if it's some sort of a gradual release system. But what I'm not a proponent of is saying we are a phone-free school, and then it becomes the job of the teachers to enforce that, because that's where it's going to fall apart. Like what you said, it could be done poorly. The minute you ask your teachers to be the phone police, you lose that ability. And let's say, first 10 minutes, you're asking a kid to get off their phone. Maybe there's a power struggle. Whether you win or not, that kid's not going to learn from you. Like you've already, unless you have a good relationship, I will go back to that. But for the most part, we are asking teachers to enforce all these things that I think are outside the scope. So not that they can't hold kids accountable. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that teachers can't model and hold kids accountable. I'm saying if you're going to claim you're a phone-based school, then or a phone-free school, not phone-based, phone-free school, then you need to have a larger school-wide system that supports that.
Have you seen examples of that? I'm just wondering what that would look like.
I personally have not seen it done well. I know right now, and I think a lot of it is in relationship. Like I said, this book came to me because superintendents in my region were reading it. So a lot of our schools are going that direction. I've heard some stories of it going well, but again, I would say in those examples, it's coming from the superintendent. It's not coming from even a building principal or a classroom teacher themselves.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even here, he talks a little bit about if you're trying to do it at the individual class level, but then let them use it in other spaces, that's kind of setting up for failure.
Yeah.
And that it does have to be for the entire school day in order for it to be successful.
Yeah.
And then less of that onus is on the individual teacher, not impacting those relationships.
Yes.
I'm super curious because my kiddos own school, so they were experimenting this year with Yonder Pouch.
Mm-hmm.
You guys heard that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in large part that has been successful. I think what I've started to hear anecdotally is that students are now bringing a second phone.
Burner.
So they put that in the Yonder Pouch, and then when the teacher says, like, show me your Yonder Pouch, apparently there's like some random checks every once in a while.
A calculator.
The student technically has one in there, but then they have the operational one.
See, that is no different than creating a fake Finstagram to give to your parents. Here's my Instagram. Then you've got a private one that your parents don't know about. That's where you actually do your stuff. Or the amount of times I'd hear kids say they make a Facebook page because their parents are on Facebook, and then that kind of gets them off their back. Well, I've got access to social media, when you just kind of have to assume you don't. Like I'm listening to you say that, Vanessa, and I'm like, of course they do. Would that ever occur to me? No, because I have a tendency to assume the best in people to a fault. Mm-hmm. Kids, their job is to get around the rules they don't like. That is their responsibility, right?
Well, number one motivation. They were experimenting because apparently it's like a special magnet to like open and close. So then anyway, middle schoolers.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's selling those magnets to open it on Amazon.
And I kind of love that.
I mean, like, to the students' point of view, like, if they don't understand, they think it is a stupid, meaningless rule that they have to follow. So maybe to counter that, those conversations have to take place first, and then do some sort of, as you come in through the school day, now that you have those relationships established. But I don't know that there's a perfect answer, but I'm wondering if it's not a pouch, if it truly needs to be a physical location.
Well, it also, I think, like, the phone-free school piece is huge, right? But Debbie said it before, like, if you don't replace it with something, you can't just take kids' phones away and then not give them something in return. I don't mean a device. I mean, like, his next suggestion is more playful schools, like schools full of play. And I think we maybe have a tendency to think about that as like an elementary level, but I think that is part of the problem. Like, if you hear playful schools and you think, oh, kinder through fifth, and you're not thinking middle school and high school, then you need to shift your thinking, because play looks different, but there should be an opportunity for kids to socialize and to, like, so we drove to Spokane this weekend, hour and a half there, 3-hour round trip, right? So a lot of time for Anna and I to be talking, and we were talking about this a little bit, and I said, what are the things you remember from high school? Because I forget, I don't want to cite anything because I'm going to get it wrong, but there's been some directives either at the state level or within the district level that, like, things that are non-academic, they're just not making room for them. Maybe she was talking to some former colleagues in a different district, so not our home district, about how they're just not doing fun things anymore. They're not doing fun assemblies. They're not doing spirit assemblies. They're not doing, like, these things that make school a joyous place, because there's been such a turn to focus on academic achievement. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like, I'm not saying academic achievement is a bad thing, but if I think back to, like, middle school or high school, just the first things that come to my mind were we had Friday morning clubs in middle school where we played. You could choose. One year I just procrastinated and I got stuck in pottery with Mr. Leggett. And that actually rocked. Like it ended up being pretty awesome. But like roller hockey, or like teachers were able to like take things they're passionate about and just goof around with kids for a little bit in the mornings on Fridays. And like high school, I remember spirit assemblies and dress up weeks and socializing with my friends in between class. It's like all those academic skills I got, they were there, but they are not the things that stick with me or made me who I am. You know, and taking those things away from kids is not okay. It's not okay.
Mhm.
And so if we take away phones and then we replace it with a strictly academic setting where kids are just going from class to class to class to class, of course they're going to rebel. But give them a reason and foster a reason for them to want to be at school without their phone. Easier said than done, especially with the financial hardships that schools are facing. But like, what are some things you can bring into schools to prioritize a human connection, you know, because if you just take away something that you think is bad because you think it's robbing them of a human connection, cool. It's not enough to do nothing after that. You've got to build in some other time.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote that same thing. I said, well, what can this look like in high school? And I think you're right. We assume, I mean, the middle school here, which is 5th through 8th grade, still has recess. The kids get these times outside. And of course, recess looks different than it did in elementary school. The play spaces look different. It's been interesting because my son was a 5th grader, then a 6th grader, and listening to how he's spending his time at recess. And then when he tells me what the 7th and 8th graders do, like, you know what I mean? There is a progression, but then all of a sudden it's gone. And I taught 9th grade and I would get these kids from middle school and they had a hard time that they didn't have these breaks. And so I think free play, and you did a great job summing it up, Stefan, everything I would say around, one, it's going to fail if it's being done to the kids. So don't just tell them to put their stuff in a pouch and not have them understand why. And I have always lots of great ideas of some sort of, and whether it happens, you know, in the beginning of middle school or somewhere in that transition, but kids actually learning about this stuff. And I do think whether it's health, whether it's like there's a lot of places it could happen, whether it's an advisory class, but I think if they were faced with some of these facts, then that would change their understanding of, you know, not everybody, but I think that's how you're going to get their buy-in. It can't be done to them. It has to be done like with them. I was also really interested in this Let Grow project that he talks about and I totally get it. He's part of this, you know, organization. So he's giving a plug, but it sounded really good. And I would be willing to explore this more, this idea of, and I think this is another resource that parents can start to lean into. And I think it's another thing that if teachers are assigning this, saying, go home and do these things, and it's kind of something that the families are talking through together. I just loved the examples of some of the stuff that kids were stepping up and doing on their own.
Well, and with the Let It Grow in particular, I think like the encouragement of doing something new and like helping them develop that confidence and that agency, I think really spoke to me.
It's so easy for this to feel like it's just a school issue or it's just a parent issue. And I really think this is that bridge where parents and schools need to be seen as partners and having a collective approach on this. And I do like how he breaks this down by ages and kind of takes them through, you know, quote unquote best practice. And this is a big one for me. And this is where I think I see this out and about a lot, but on page 271, talking about not using technology to stop tantrums or as a pacifier. And we talk about that a lot with Mike, like this idea of like, it's not a way to calm down. It's not a way to regulate your emotions. Like you need to be able to do that on your own. And I think that's one thing parents can think about, how, especially with your young ones, because if you're doing this when they're young, it's going to just morph into something else as they get older. But how are we allowing screens to interrupt some of this self-regulation that we were talking about earlier, about how that is such a big piece of, what kids need to learn.
Well, and the power of laying a good foundation, like
Yeah.
starting early. And again, to go back to sometimes it feels like it's too late. It's never too late. It's going to be harder as it's earlier. It's harder to take something away than to gradually introduce something. But
Mhm.
another thing Ann and I were talking about over the weekend, our eldest has been in getting speech services for it's probably been about 2 years now, and we noticed some developmental delays as he was pretty young, and at every single turn, doctors, school, whatever, he's going to mature into it. He's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. And thank God. Thank God. I was going to say we know better. Thank God my wife knows better. Like pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get occupational therapy and speech therapy. And just a couple days ago, I saw some video of him from about 3 years ago. And so he's about the same age as my almost 3-year-old now, like singing a song. And he is almost incomprehensible. Like we knew what he was saying because you learn the language of your kids, and he's singing some song by the Beatles all together now, and he's singing it. We had taken a video, sent it to my father-in-law because he's a huge Beatles fan, and it's this adorable little video. But his speech is so far behind for where he should have been at 3, that it's compared to where he is now, where he's like, we just got his little report card from Kinder, and he's proficient at every level, excelling in several, and that is due to him having a good kindergarten teacher and early intervention, and it's so easy in hindsight to look back and hear him having trouble forming words in his mouth, right? And to be able to compare that to our son who's about the same age now. Same thing goes with this, like the power of building good habits early on. Like, I love that you called out that self-regulation piece, not building a habit of like, oh, you are, throwing a tantrum, this will, and I get the impulse as a parent, right? You are just, when your kid is screaming at you and you are overstimulated and your house is just insane, you're looking for any exit strategy. I get it. But like, I like this 0 to 5, like just immerse them in the world. Do not put them on screens. Do not. And when it is like screen time, it should be like good, productive, like that type of stuff, but they're not sitting there mindlessly consuming for like like hours and hours on end. So like, I don't know. I just been thinking recently about just the power of getting on this stuff early, in whatever facet that looks like.
But I also think if you didn't get on it early, to not feel like it's too late. There's no reason that you can't sit down with your kids and say, hey, I've learned a few things. I want to try this a different way. And again, being really transparent on why. I think there's I don't want people to feel like, oh, I already have a 13-year-old. You know what I mean? I think that, again, some of these, especially if you can lean into the school and lean into your, community groups and kind of, I don't know. I don't want people to have that mentality that, there's nothing left to be done. Cause I don't necessarily agree with that.
For sure.
Okay. I have to interject. And I guess it's more like my own wondering, you guys. So I know that what I'm about to say can potentially be controversial. But I think we are having this dialogue as adults with 2 parents in the household with a certain level of privilege or, our schedule allows us to be present, like for the most part in the evenings and on weekends. So through this, I just kept thinking about like regulation, self-regulation. Absolutely. I think both school age children, the teacher children that we're seeing in the classrooms need that support. But what I keep thinking about is, we're talking about needing those outside of school. And how does this look, or like what community supports need to be in place, especially for families that maybe only have one adult, or parent or parents are working multiple jobs, and or for the parents, this is a new concept that they've never learned themselves. So I feel like there are things that we as individuals would need to help provide in the community to one another to like truly foster this. So again, sorry, but it's all kind of like just in my brain, and I'm feeling like that doesn't mean we shouldn't, but knowing that there are these additional confounding variables, how do we strengthen one another outside of school to support kids and families in other ways?
I think I get where you're coming from, and I would also add that communities have a tendency to have more resources than I give them credit for. I have this tendency to go, there's nothing in Moses Lake. Like there's nothing around here. There's a lot more than I think. And it's just that I've just got such disdain for the area that I'm not looking. And that's on me. But you're right. I'm with you about community resources, and I also say those things are out there. Look for your boys and girls clubs, the local library, the what city resources, camps, whatever are people putting on, because typically those things are subsidized by taxes and they're cheap and accessible for a reason. Just to name a few here in Moses, there's this summer camp that is very accessible and very, very good in Moses Lake that we send our eldest to over the summer, just a couple days a week. Even though we have that privilege of being here with him over the summer, we still try to maximize time with him, but also like he needs to be with his peers in kind of an unstructured setting to access those things. So that's like, we do that. The our local library does, or I think it's the library does this like roving like bookmobile and puts on like these community events at parks a couple times a week that like you could like walk to or get to. Like those things are out there. And the other thing I think I would say, not to push back on that a little bit, but to consider is, what were people doing pre-cell phone? This is not a problem that's unique to our generation. Not all of those things were good things for sure, but to say like my only avenue for my kid being home alone because I have to work. And again, I feel a little weird saying this because I 100% agree with you, coming from a place of privilege, like a lot of privilege. The only avenue for to occupy my kid to be home while I work is to put them on a screen, I don't think is universally true. It is just the first thing we think of.
It's easiest and the most convenient.
And we fell into that trap when Anna and I both had early
so
morning.
easy. Of course.
Well, and I think with COVID too, during COVID, I had one that was on Zoom quite a bit, and then my youngest was not. But I think while I was occupied, and at a certain point, then my husband was back like at his job. And so that was easy. But I think now, to both of your points, that doesn't mean it's too late or you can't take the next step. For me, I almost feel like it reminds me how important it is just to be having the conversations, and maybe in our spaces, not necessarily as professionals, but like just parts of the community, to be talking to others about this, and also, be aware of what already exists to be able to share them in whatever capacity.
Yeah. And I would say if you're in that 6 to 12-year-old range on page 277, if you're only going to do one thing, learn the parental controls and the content filters. And honestly, that's something I need to do a little bit more work on, content filters in my own house. Just I trust my eldest and I check you know what I mean? But there's more I could be doing. And I also think that is something that schools can help, because that is the number one thing parents, when I do community nights, that they don't understand how to do, and it feels overwhelming and confusing. Hey, tech companies, you could make it a little bit easier. But I do think we could step in and help them navigate that, and even like bring your devices. Let's set them up tonight. Like you know what I mean? And having those spaces where they could do that. But there are really good examples in this section. I think he goes through lots of very realistic, maybe not the high school exchange program one, but very realistic things that people can take a look at as far as, what you can do and steps you can take in your own home with your own kids. But I do want to make sure we have time to talk about the smoke study, because Stefan, I know you were really interested in that, and it kind of brings us into this conclusion piece. And I think like my biggest takeaway, I was actually chatting with a gal last night about, she's in getting her counseling degree right now, her childhood counseling degree. And we both have come through her studies and then through all my work with this, we have both come to the same conclusion that the number one thing we need to be doing is having conversations, is sitting with our kids and having these conversations and finding our people, this idea of speaking up. So Stefan, I'm going to let you talk about the study. But to me, my takeaway from this is being a little bit more vocal, even if it's uncomfortable in our own spaces.
Yeah. And what this made me think of was, I'm sure I've told this story before, but when I was doing a parent night, when I was a tech coach at the high school, and first year at the high school, every kid had Chromebooks, sent them home to and from school. It was probably about 2018. And doing a parent night, one of the things I told them was, don't let them have it in their room. Set up a dedicated space for them to do their work, and like, don't let them on it. It's like, they don't have to be on it. This is yours. And I remember parents saying, I didn't know I could do that. Like, this is the school's computer. And I was like, you're the parent, but
it's in your house.
Yes. But it made me think, like, this story made me think of that. So this story, again, it's on 291 towards the end of the book under the heading Speak Up. But the idea that if you're alone in a room and you see smoke, 75% of the subjects in this story like took action to say like, hey, there's smoke. And if they were with somewhere else, they were less likely to do it, because the idea being, well, they're not doing anything about it, so I probably shouldn't be super worried about it. Or like, someone else is maybe already taking care of this, right? This is herd mentality. And that's exactly what was happening with parents. Is they're like, well, they didn't tell me that I could. They didn't tell me anything about these dangers, so it's probably okay, right? Or it plays around with this idea of, we just assume it's someone else's responsibility, or we at least, the very least, question that it might be ours. And schools get into this, I shouldn't use the term fight, but I'm gonna get into this tension. There's this tension with parents all the time. Like, we're constantly trying to figure out, is this the school's responsibility? Is this the student? Is this the parent's responsibility? And for what it's worth, where I land on that is, a parent can opt their kid out of whatever the heck they want at school, which is something I tell my parents, my like friends all the time. Like, you don't like what's happening in schools, like you're uncomfortable with whatever, then you need to voice that to the school. Like, you need to make your voice heard. You have the power as a parent to say, they're not going through this unit. They're not doing whatever, and like, you can take control of that. Because the alternate side to that is, maybe let's do it with cell phones, right? Like, they're having these discussions around the dangers of social media and cyberbullying. And you have a very specific code of ethics that you expect your son or daughter to adhere to at home. And you don't really want that conflicting at school. And so you don't really see the benefit of them sitting through that. Not the greatest example, but you could pull them from that. You might be the only parent in that classroom that's having that conversation with that kid, especially depending on the age. And so, I would say it's a moral responsibility of schools to have those conversations in school. That way, everybody gets that education. That's what makes the American education system so beautiful, is we get everyone, every single kid. And that means they all come from different walks of life. And so I just like from a school sense, this, like we think someone else is taking care of it and we're less likely to take action when so many people can see the problem. I think sometimes we forget that individual responsibility and accountability, or at least individual agency, and it seems counterintuitive, right? Like there's two people that see the smoke, twice as many chances of them reporting it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think this is one where people see or sense that there is something amiss, but maybe can't quite put their finger on it. Or I think what we were talking about before, feel like it's already gotten out of hand and it's too hard to reel it back in. And so that's where my mind is right now, is thinking about what are the ways we can support, our schools via our parents to help anybody in that boat. You know what I mean? And so I just feel like this brings us kind of back to these two big questions. And these are things that we've sort of had in the back of our mind. And I don't know that we're actually going to tackle these questions right now. I think we're going to save that for something in the future. But the two questions that we have sort of been thinking about is, one, what small shifts can we make in classrooms to prioritize human connection over screen time? So thinking about our roles in the classroom, and I think this is delicate because this is really where that balance comes in. We're not saying don't use these tools, but how can we prioritize human connection over just use the, you know what I mean? Like just go do this as a solitary thing. So I think that's an interesting thing for teachers to think about. Our other second question is, what's our role in helping students navigate digital worlds with care, curiosity, and agency? And I think those are three really important words. You probably have a sense that my two responses to this are going to be wrapped up in media literacy and UDL. But I think that's another question that weighs on teachers, because that's such an important piece, yet it's not directly stated in content standards. Now, if you come to one of our media literacy events, you'll learn that there are lots of places in our content standards where we have these things, but I just think that this one is a little bit harder for teachers to tackle intentionally with all their other responsibilities. So I think what we're going to do, since Vanessa had to leave early to go be a mom, I think let's put these questions, if those, for the people who are doing this with Canvas and getting clock hours, let's put this as our final discussion and hear what our two listeners, your mom and my mom, hopefully there's some more people listening, have to say about this. And then we can use that to kind of help guide our future discussion. What do you think about that, Stefan?
I love that. I think that's a great idea. And there's no way my mom's going to listen to this. Down to one.
I think I could probably get my sister. No, I'm teasing. I think that this has just been really good though, and we sort of selfishly set out in the beginning of let's just record our conversations and give ourselves time to really dig into this, because it is such a complex topic, and how it's helping our own learning, to the time that we've been able to take to sort of just really dive into this, I think has just given me a lot to think about. And I'm already keeping a list of resources I think I can start making to support our district. So I'm just glad we took the time for this. And if people are on the edge of their seats, we've been talking about, continuing these conversations beyond just this book. There's lots of other resources that people have floated our way or send us as they know we're talking about these things. So we are looking at ways to sort of keep this conversation going on the slow scroll.
There you go. Yeah, it could be articles, could be books, could be webinars. I don't know. He name checks a book in here called Free Range Kids that piqued my interest. It's it's almost 20 years old because it came out in 2009, which feels aggressive, but that sounds interesting. So yeah, we'll see what else comes up, but especially around this topic, or just around tech education in schools and parenting and what that looks like. We'll definitely be back for more.
All right. Thanks for the journey.
That's it for this episode of The Slow Scroll. These are messy and important conversations, and we're glad you're in them with us. If something sparked your thinking or unsettled it, we hope you'll sit with it, talk about it, and bring it into your work with kids. You can connect with us, ask questions, or provide feedback using the link to the feedback form in the show notes. Feel free to share the episode, send it to a colleague, or keep the dialogue going in your own circles. Just don't stop talking about what matters.